Hi, Armand here to talk about the Saturn Neptune square. A bit of a recap as the last of three Saturn Neptune squares took place or takes place on September 10th, 2016. Before we go into that, let me remind you first of all, I cannot answer your questions and comments for reasons that I won't go into right now, but I appreciate them, but I cannot answer them. So you can go to the website and send me an email if you really want to get the comment to me and get me to respond to it. Otherwise, I will read and appreciate the comments that I find on YouTube. The other thing is, of course, you should just go to the website and see what's there. There's all kinds of things, articles. Mercury's retrograde right now, so you may want to check that out. Mercury's retrograde every so often, so you may want to check that out. Monthly forecast, you can sign up for the newsletter. There's all kinds of things that are there, so you may want to take advantage of that. You can even get a consultation. You know, astrology works pretty well when you sort of individualize it. But on to the Saturn Neptune square, and we're going to be short about this, I think, because the Saturn Neptune square is so very difficult to talk about. It started in November of 2015, and Saturn is our sense of structure, those things that seem to be kind of permanent and reliable and always there, and Neptune, very different. It's a nebulous type of energy. It's illusions and dreams. It can be delusions, but it's just in general things that are beyond the concrete reality. It is other worlds. It's the dream world. It's the worlds that we access through meditation, psychedelics. It is everything that is beyond this kind of concrete earthly reality. And so Saturn and Neptune have a degree of, I wouldn't say conflict with each other, but it's kind of hard for them to sort of be on the same page and talk. And so when they're in aspect to each other, we have this rather challenging situation where our reality, our Saturnian reality, our sense of what we know to be true, is challenged by Neptune kind of dissolving it. And it leads to a period of disorientation and eventually then to a kind of reorientation. Now, the disorientation started more or less in November of 2015 when the planets finally get close enough to each other to be in aspect. In the square aspect, they kind of start to bring up questions about what's real. With Saturn in the sign of Sagittarius, it has a lot to do with our belief systems, political, religious, and otherwise. And I think it's obvious to see that there's been a lot of challenges to that, especially as we often have seen in the past year that the Saturnian reality of what's we're going to do is challenged by the Neptunian need for compassion and a greater sense of expansion in terms of who we're going to include and what we're going to include in our schemes, in our philosophies. And so the Saturn Neptune square has been very disorienting. I think that it was when the mutable cross was in effect in late May and early June, or really throughout June of 2016, that the disorientation kind of peaked and we sort of hit a doldrums period where we weren't really quite sure what was going on. I think certainly true in the collective, but in our individual lives as well. We sort of lose the compass. We sort of don't know what time it is. We don't know where we are, and we don't know where we're heading. And so we're sort of floating out at sea, not quite sure. There were periods there in May and June that just seemed to be suspended. It was like the suspended animation feeling. You know, the old sci-fi movies where the people would be suspended in that suspended animation while they got shot to another planet or something like that in a rocket ship. It kind of felt a bit like that. And over the summer, Mars went from being retrograde to being direct, and Saturn turned around and went direct. And gradually, we've seen more motion, more movement happening. Although I think we're not quite sure where we're going. As we hit eclipse season, starting in late August and going through mid-September, and Jupiter moves into Libra, I think that the sense of things changes quite a bit. We feel the need to act. Yes, we're not really sure what's real. We're not really sure which way is up. We're not really sure which is the way to shore. But given enough distress, given that we've been underwater long enough, we have to pick a direction and say maybe this is up. If we're lost at sea and the clouds start rolling in, we start saying, okay, well, one way must be the way to shore. Let's start rowing. And that's kind of what I think is happening as we get towards this third hit of the Saturn Neptune square. I think that we are choosing from all of the different possibilities, from all of those scattered visions, from all of the nebulous feeling that we have, we're not quite sure what's going on. We're choosing something or some things and saying, well, this looks like it might be right. I'm going with this. And that's what we move forward on. And just as Neptune can dissolve Saturnian reality, so can Saturn crystallize Neptunian visions, Neptunian illusions as well, Neptunian delusions as well. So in this year where we've seen a lot of conspiracy theories, where we've seen a lot of conspiracies, just because it's a theory doesn't mean it's not happening, where we have had a lot of uncertainty, somehow some of that has to look like it might be the right answer. And if we provisionally accept it and move on it, it's probably the best bet. If you are lost at sea and there is a storm coming, you probably should get moving. You probably shouldn't sit in the same place and just see what happens. Hopefully you'll remember that your decision is just that. It's a decision. It's a direction that you've chosen. Hopefully you'll remember that you have some flexibility, because it's really always there. Neptune is always there. You always have the ability to make changes, and you always have the ability to shift your course. But right now, I think the thing that we're thinking is that we just want to get on course. We just want to get moving someplace. And so we're going to choose a direction, not quite at random, but maybe not quite as well thought out as we would ideally like to have. And we're going to get moving in that direction. Before too long, sometime in the next few months, half a year, that direction that we've chosen, that choice that we've made, that hope that we have made, is going to start to look like reality. It's going to start to look like the new normal, to use the expression. And if we don't remember that we can make choices at any point in time, it's liable to be the new reality for a while, until Saturn and Neptune meet again in 2026. And that brings up the final point. This is what we call a closing square. Saturn and Neptune last met in 1989, and we can think about what a realignment that was. That was the time of the end of communism, the so-called fall of the Soviet Union. It was Tiananmen Square in China. It was a major realignment. It changed the way we look at just about everything. And so what we're doing now, in a sense, and this is, if you have the sort of time and the patience and the inclination, this is not a bad thing to think about. If you're old enough, if you go back to 1989 and you look in your personal life and in our collective lives, what kinds of things were happening at that time, what sort of realities we were creating for ourselves individually and collectively, and recognize that what we're doing now at this closing square, 3/4 of the way through the cycle, is saying, yeah, this was good, this is something I would keep, and this didn't really work. And we're also saying, when we get another start on creating our reality, what sorts of things might we want to include? It's a big process. It's so big it's hard to get a handle on. It's like when people are out at sea and a tidal wave comes along. It's not really like the Poseidon Adventure. Actually, they get raised up 20 or 30 feet, but because the swell is so huge, they don't even know it. If you're on shore, you know about the tidal wave. And we've sort of already had that aspect of things. No, what we're feeling now is a major kind of realignment, and it relates to what happened in the late 80s. Most recently, it happened to the realities that we were creating for ourselves around 2005, 2006, when these two planets were opposite each other. But you don't have to look at the big picture if you don't want to. The basic message stays the same. We're at a time when we are deciding what we are going to say is real. Choose wisely.